On this video, you're going to see the world champion Magnus Carlsen face the strongest woman in the world, Hou Yifan, 24 years old, from China. You're also going to see some great endgame technique and maybe pick up a few tips on how to stop a player like Carlsen. So round 2 of the Grenke Chess Classic, and Carlsen opening with e4. Of course, Yifan is rated quite a bit below Carlsen, number 95 on the current live rating list, against Carlsen, of course, being number 1. But Yifan has improved a lot over the last couple of years. She won the Biel Grandmaster tournament last summer. That was an excellent result. And she did draw against Carlsen in last year's Grenke Chess Classic, so not to be underestimated. And here, of course, knight f3 is the normal move, but Carlsen, I don't think, wanted to face this kind of preparation. Yifan and many other Chinese players are specialists in the Petrov opening. So typically for Carlsen, he avoids a mainline theory and just plays bishop c4, the bishop's opening, which of course is very solid, but is not the most testing. And here, well, Carlsen has played in this way before. He played against Boo in the World Cup. If you might recall, Boo played knight c6 here. And they also reached a Spanish type position. And Boo managed to beat him. But here, Yifan plays the recommended move c6 with the idea of d5. And now the main line is knight f3. And after d5, the bishop drops back here, and so on. But instead, Carlsen very quickly played queen e2. The idea, of course, is that that prevents d5 because you can then take on e5 with check. So bishop e7 played here instead by Yifan. I can see in my database that bishop c5 was played here in London 1787 by Philidor. So going back. So it just shows you this is a really old system. And knight f3 hits the pawn, d6, and now c3. So what we've got here is a position that could have arisen or is very similar to Spanish type positions. You can see instead of the bishop going via b5, around here, it's just come via c4. But this looks like a Brea variation of the Spanish, where black has just played the knight to d7 in one move, instead of going c6 back to b8 and then d7. So in a sense, it feels as though black has gained some time here in order to get this very nice setup. And Yifan can immediately try to take the initiative on the queen side with a5s. So you can see here we basically have a Spanish type position, not the exact move order, but a typical position for the Spanish. But Yifan gaining space on the queen side. And also you can see that queen e2 isn't necessarily the best square for the queen, because with the rook opposite on the e-file, already tactics are starting to brew there, so black might be able to break with d5. For the moment, Carlsen just bolsters the e-pawn with rook e1. But now he's starting to feel the heat. Yifan plays this typical little curl up, rook e8 and bishop back to f8. And more pressure here, more pressure against the queen. So Carlsen just plays very pragmatically and puts the queen back on d1. But of course, this is losing a lot of time, and you can see that Yifan has gained space on the queen side, and so in a sense is kind of ahead in development. And here I was a little bit surprised. Yifan played queen c7, which looks like procrastination to me. I think she should have been just more active and played with g6 and bishop g7, and you know, sometimes you can even trade on d4 and then play c5, or instead of that, even playing c5 straight away, because it feels as though black's development is ahead, so why not exploit that? Whereas queen c7, it's not exactly clear how that fits in with other plans. Of course, it's not a bad square, and it's not in any sense a blunder. It's just, for me, it's a sign of indecision. Knight f1, so Carlsen plays the typical maneuver with the knight. So that frees the bishop, and the knight might come out to g3. It might, in some circumstances, come to e3. g6 played. There we go, the normal move. And now here we have a typical Carlsen move. He loves to play this move, bishop g5, in these kind of positions with the pawns on e4 and e5. He likes to test his opponent. He likes to kind of just provoke them. And this is a provoking move. Of course, it's possible to play bishop g7 here, but then queen d2 claims this diagonal, and that's, well, it's, at the very least, it's useful for white to have that. So therefore, Yifan, after 6.5 minutes thought, pushes the bishop. Now the bishop sometimes goes back to h4. Carlsen likes to do that kind of thing, but you know, here you might need the knight on g3, and of course that would block in the bishop. So instead, Carlsen, after just a few seconds, put the bishop back on d2. So, okay, why does he want to bring that pawn to h6? Well, he's got a little something to bite on now. He might be able to attack that pawn later. Bishop g7 and knight g3. So very solid, just protecting this pawn. Now there are several decent moves for black. Bishop b7, c5, but knight b6 also looks absolutely fine. This bishop could be useful on this diagonal. The knight, of course, would love to come into c4 to hit a bishop. Therefore, b3 from Carlsen. After 7 minutes thought, that was quite a big thing for him. Generally, he was playing very, very quickly in this game. And at this point, Yifan thought for half an hour. Now, that is a massive investment of time. And against someone like Carlsen, a big mistake, it has to be said. Unless you get things absolutely right, then it's just too slow. It's just impractical. And from this moment on, even though it's move 18, you could feel that Yifan was under pressure. So actually, after this half an hour's thought, she came up with a good plan. She played these forcing moves, and then bishop g4. And now came Carlsen's longest think of the game. He spent almost 14 minutes on his next move. And I think he was right to spend quite a bit of time here, because it's now reaching quite a critical situation. Yifan wants to perhaps damage white's pawns. She also has a potential plan of switching to the open A file with the rook, perhaps using the queen afterwards as well. So suddenly Carlsen has, I wouldn't say problems to deal with, but he has to get it right here. He needs a proper plan. And his time investment was certainly worth it. He played queen c1. So coming back to this loose pawn on h6, and also removing the queen from the open A file. Now Yifan trades on f3. Well, if you're going to play bishop g4, you may as well do that. And now we have a more double-edged situation, because although Carlsen will be very happy now to have this bishop, and the two bishops indeed, particularly the light squared bishop, doesn't have an opponent now. On the other hand, Yifan could be happy that she's damaged the pawns here, on the king side, and that gives her counter chances at some point in the game. So now she has to deal with the threat to h6. So if key h7, then f4, and well, double-edged situation, but with the center opening, you don't really want to have your king on the same line as the bishop. So therefore Yifan played h5, and I think it is the best move because sometimes you might be able to just push that knight out of the way and play the knight into h5. So here, well, at first glance I was actually quite surprised by Carlsen's move. I was anticipating something like f4. Same idea as before, trying to blow things open, but clearly this wasn't exactly to his taste. For example, the situation could get very, very double-edged after something like this. So that opens up the diagonal for this bishop. The knight finds a good square here, and well, you never know when a queen might be able to find its way over to the king side. Very double-edged position. Instead, Carlsen kept control. He played bishop h6. Now, I was a little bit surprised about this because you've got the two bishops, and generally you don't want to trade off the bishops. But this does introduce some attacking ideas for white. So, for example, let's just play this move. Knight d7, okay, a solid move. Then knight f5. And suddenly this is, well, it's extremely dangerous. Obviously, if that's taken, then queen g5, and we're going to get a checkmate very soon. Now, you don't have to take that. But Yifan now played a practical move, queen e7, but that took her almost 9 minutes to play, so she was using up a lot of time. She's only at move 23, got to get to the time control at move 40. And time already becoming an issue in this game. That's what Carlsen is brilliant at. Playing pragmatically, playing quickly, and setting his opponent problems. So Carlsen traded. So you can see he's kept control on the king side, and the queen comes here, threatening a juicy fork here, so the king stepped out of the way. And now he straightens out his pawns. f4. But he's doing so with the queen right by the king, or right on the king side. So he's not going to fall prey to any kind of black attack here. And he even has attacking chances of his own, of course. And Yifan, again, she invested quite a lot of time here comparatively. She played her next move after 5.5 minutes. She could trade here and set up a counterattack with rook a8. This is always a theme in this position. But giving up center in this way, particularly when you have to contemplate moves like e5, unleashing the bishop here, is very worrying. You can't, it's impossible to work everything out. So she played more quietly with knight d7, and this was what Carlsen was banking on. Very quickly he traded. He took on e5, and again very quickly he'd sized up this situation with such speed and put so much pressure on his opponent. He played rook d1 here, when to my eyes the most natural move would be rook a1 to take the open file, and coming down here, something like this. But this is very double-edged actually. h4, and sometimes black can play the knight into f6, sometimes attack these pawns like this. Indeed, c5 straight away is also an option. But rook d1 played instead keeps far more control in the position. The rook still wants to enter into the position, but somehow the center is better protected. If this is traded, well, you can still take with the pawn, but it might be nice to take with a rook and then come into d6. So it's all about maintaining control. Yifan played rook e8, so she's Still dreaming of this possibility coming around here, and that is a good idea actually. So pawn takes, and that knight got pushed, comes to g4, and now rook d6. So we're reaching, this is move 32. Yifan short, running shorter and shorter on time, and here she played, let's say, the obvious move, rook e6, to stop the rook taking the pawn. But in fact she should have played rook a8, but this needs precise calculation, and when you're short of time you simply, it's too risky to invest a lot of time calculating variations such as this, which are potentially very, very tricky, and they might not even be right. You know, you might calculate very long variations and find out you're losing. So what's the big idea of rook a8? White obviously would like to take a pawn, but then comes rook a2. So instead of doing something about this knight, straight on the counter-attack, hitting the bishop. And if rook takes, then rook takes bishop, and although black has a pawn down, it's obvious that the counter-attack is very, very strong, and white's king not in a pleasant situation, cut on the 7th. Now there are other variations there, it's more complicated. That was the way to go. Instead rook e6 played, and now it's tricky. Black's forces are a little bit split. This knight is not a happy piece. It's loose, it's not really going anywhere, and it's not really connected with these pieces either. And the rook is somewhat stuck up a blind alley on e6. King g7 played, and knight f1. That's again a very clever move from Carlsen. Instead of embarking on some kind of attack at the other end of the board, he just drops the knight, covering this square, preventing knight e3 and a potential counterattack. And here once again, in fact, the way to go is to play knight f6 and rook e7 with the idea rook here and rook a2. But again, very, very difficult to appreciate when you're short of time. Instead, Yifan played rook f6. She's striving to bring this rook into the game, but the tactics didn't work out well for her. h3 first, pushing that knight to a poorer square. f5 from Carlsen. Again, it's the kind of move that would perhaps be unexpected. Carlsen seems like he's giving up a pawn. Perhaps Yifan just simply underestimated this move, but Carlsen had it worked out well, or well enough. I'll explain why in a second. So this was taken. Yeah, I mean, I think this has to be taken. Suddenly there's a threat to play e5 to actually trap that rook. So pawn takes pawn, and knight g3. This is the point. Hitting two pawns. Rook g6, and here Carlsen actually played an inaccuracy, although very hard to understand why. He should play king h2 here. And, well, this is very good for white, because if rook g5, then the king is able to defend that pawn, and then white will go on the counter-attack with knight h5 and so on, or possibly pawn takes pawn first, depending how black plays. The difference is that after king f2, in fact, rook g5, again, a very, very difficult move to spot. This is a computer move. The reason rook g5 is a good move is that if h4, then after rook g4, the king is unable to protect that h-pawn. And white can try various things here, but, well, pawn takes pawn at first glance looks very strong, you know, with potential ideas of f6, but here's the trick. After h4, f6 isn't actually working, because after this fork, the king comes back to hit the rook, and, well, knight takes rook, king takes rook, and black will hold that position. But, you know, trying to work out these obscure tactics in a shorter time is nigh on impossible. And I think the important thing here is that Carlsen had the initiative. He was playing very quickly and very fluently and just putting all the pressure on his opponent. So Yifan played, let's say, the obvious move, just taking a pawn. But now it's gone horribly wrong, because after bishop e4, that of course forces f5 and the bishop drops back, and everything has fallen into place for white. This bishop is on a superb diagonal, tying black to the defense of this pawn. It's incredible how so often in Spanish type positions this light squared bishop is a star piece when it looks like it's blocked in for so long, but it's extraordinary. I've had that so often in my games. And black's pieces are split. You can see this knight is very poorly placed. So Yifan, this is the 41st move, so first move after the time control. She invested 12 minutes here. She's obviously just coming to terms with the new situation. But white's pieces are so well coordinated now. So if knight d6, you can just swipe a pawn. So knight e5. Now again, next move from Carlsen, beautiful technique. Don't swipe the pawn straight away, because that gives black a little bit of counterplay after this check. And taking here, and this isn't as simple as one would wish. But instead, before you swipe a pawn, instead of taking immediately, knight f4. Excellent move, controlling the d3 square. Just restricting black's pieces. Hitting the rook, so the rook moved, and now rook takes f5. So knight d7. Now, the knight comes back into play, but, well, white has everything under control. And you can see how all the knights are doing, they're just protecting each other, not actually playing a very active role. King e2 I like as well, another restricting move from Carlsen, covering the d3 square. So now he is a safe and sound pawn up. And it's all about maintaining control. So now he switches diagonals with the bishop, actually. He's looking to attack black's king. And this is nice, the knight coming back. You can see everything under control. So now he's looking to give a check, and then give a check on f5. So Yifan avoids that, and now the king just steps up. You can see everything's protected, and yet the pieces, white's pieces, complement each other beautifully. So making room potentially for the knight to come in here, and the king steps up, and bishop comes back. So, I mean, it's a very comical situation with the pieces all on the F file like this. But the important thing is that white is restricting the movement of black's knights. Nothing much for black to do here. Yifan plays this, but this gets hacked off. Now, of course, with these pawns split, that's just another problem. And the rook entering the position beautifully here. Now it's not a lot of fun. Rooks are long-range pieces. Very nice. You can't get at the rook, and it has maximum effect as well. h5, another beautiful controlling move. So you can see these squares are all controlled. The black king is really restricted, as are black's pieces as well. And rook d7. Threat, take all the pawns. Yifan gives this one up, but of course this just gets taken, and here she resigned it is just a hopeless situation. Black has nothing to do here, and white can swipe the last pawn and just start advancing. When you see Carlsen play games like that, you just think, he's unstoppable. But Yifan, of course, spent too much time. And, this is why she went down. But, I think we can learn from Magnus's technique. It's all about control. Wonderful, wonderful performance. So, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you like these videos. And do check out the info tab above, and you can find a Carlsen playlist, for example, and in the video description as well, you'll see lots of other links to various other playlists that are on the channel. Thanks for watching.